Hey friends, tonight we are chasing a missing summer. Imagine waking up in June, expecting sunshine and warmth, maybe planning a picnic or a lazy day at the beach, only to find gray skies, a persistent chill in the air, and frost, actual frost, in July. That's the baffling reality we're diving into, the peculiar and chilling tale of 1816, famously known as the year without a summer. You're probably thinking, oh, a bit of unseasonable weather. I can handle that. But let me tell you, with the kind of global food shortages, weird atmospheric effects, and general misery that ensued, most of us, with our reliance on central heating and next day grocery delivery, probably wouldn't survive the sheer, unrelenting weirdness and hardship of that year. It makes complaining about a rainy vacation seem a bit petty. So before you get too comfortable, go ahead and take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to see where you're all tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Drop a comment below. Now turn off your lights, turn on your fan for some gentle white noise, and let's begin tonight's journey. Our story doesn't begin in 1816, but a year earlier, in April of 1815, on the island of Sumbawa, in what is now Indonesia. You find yourself standing not in a chilly European field, but in a lush and tropical landscape. The air is warm, humid, thick with the scent of unknown blossoms and damp earth. Towering over the island is Mount Tambora, a colossal volcano, at this point largely dormant and not considered an immediate threat by the local populace. You might see villages nestled on its fertile slopes, people going about their daily lives, unaware of the cataclysm brewing beneath their feet. For days, perhaps weeks, there have been rumblings, minor tremors, and plumes of smoke. Ominous signs, certainly, but perhaps not entirely out of the ordinary in a region known for volcanic activity. The local rulers and inhabitants might have been uneasy, but no one could have predicted the scale of what was to come. Then, on the evening of April 10th, 1815, Tambora explodes. Not just erupts, but explodes with a violence that is almost impossible to comprehend. Imagine the sound, a series of concussions so massive they are heard over 1,000 miles away. Reports from the time describe it as sounding like cannon fire, confusing military outposts across the region. You feel the ground heave, a terrifying, gut-wrenching tremor. A colossal pillar of fire, ash, and rock punches miles into the atmosphere, a dark, roiling tower blotting out the sun. Pumice stones, some as large as grapefruits, rain down, and pyroclastic flows, superheated avalanches of gas and debris, roar down the mountainside at terrifying speeds, incinerating everything in their path. Entire villages, thousands of people, are wiped out in moments. The sky turns black as pitch, a suffocating darkness that lasts for days. This isn't just an eruption, it's one of the most powerful volcanic events in recorded human history, earning a VEI 7 on the Volcanic Explosivity Index, the second highest rating possible. A mainstream historical fact is that the energy released by Tambora's 1815 eruption was equivalent to many hundreds of atomic bombs. The immediate aftermath on Sumbawa and neighboring islands is apocalyptic. Thick layers of ash cover everything, collapsing homes, poisoning water sources, and devastating agricultural land. Tsunamis, generated by the volcano's collapse into the sea, sweep coastal areas. Tens of thousands die from the direct effects of the eruption. But Tambura's destructive reach is far from over. It's merely transformed. One quirky, or rather grim, detail is that the ash was so thick on the surrounding seas that ships miles away reported sailing through vast floating mats of pumice, sometimes feet thick, making navigation incredibly difficult. It was as if the ocean itself was being choked by the volcano. The sheer amount of volcanic material ejected into the stratosphere is key to understanding what happens next. We're talking about an estimated 100 to 150 cubic kilometers of rock, ash, and dust. But critically, Tambora also spewed out massive quantities of sulfur dioxide gas. This gas, once in the stratosphere, reacts with water vapor to form a fine mist of sulfuric acid aerosols. Unlike heavy ash particles that fall out relatively quickly, these tiny aerosol droplets can linger in the stratosphere for years, forming a reflective veil around the entire planet. Historians and scientists still debate the exact quantity of sulfur dioxide released and precisely how long it took for the stratospheric aerosol layer to reach its maximum density and global coverage. However, there's no doubt that this vast, high-altitude sunshade was the primary culprit for the bizarre and devastating weather that would soon grip the globe, leading to that infamous year without a summer. You can almost picture that invisible shield forming high above the clouds, subtly but inexorably altering the world's climate, setting the stage for a period of chilling darkness and hardship far beyond the shores of Indonesia. The colossal eruption of Mount Tambora in April 1815 is now a terrifying memory for those who witnessed it, but for the rest of the world, its effects are yet to be truly felt. As 1815 progresses, you can imagine that vast cloud of sulfur dioxide and fine aerosols ejected high into the stratosphere, beginning its slow, invisible journey around the globe. It's like a malevolent ghost, spreading silently through the upper atmosphere, driven by high-altitude winds. Initially, there might not be much to see from the ground in distant lands, perhaps just slightly more vibrant sunsets, or a faint haze in the sky that people might not even consciously register. But the chemistry is at work, that sulfuric acid aerosol layer steadily thickening, reflecting more and more sunlight back into space before it can warm the Earth's surface. You can almost feel a subtle, imperceptible dimming of the world, a precursor to the chaos to come. By late 1815 and into the early months of 1816, more noticeable atmospheric phenomena begin to appear across various parts of the Northern Hemisphere. People in Europe and North America witness unusually vivid, prolonged twilights and spectacular sunsets, the sky often glowing with lurid reds, oranges, and purples. The artist J.M.W. Turner, famous for his dramatic skyscapes, would later capture these unsettlingly beautiful atmospheric effects in his paintings, though he, like everyone else at the time, had no idea of their volcanic origin. A mainstream historical fact is that these remarkable optical effects were due to the scattering of sunlight by the stratospheric aerosol particles. While visually stunning, they were an ominous sign of the atmospheric disruption taking place far above. The winter of 1815 to 1816 in some regions is colder than usual, but perhaps not drastically so initially. However, as spring of 1816 approaches, things start to get genuinely weird. Instead of the expected gradual warming, the temperatures remain stubbornly low. late frosts hit regions unaccustomed to them, nipping fruit blossoms and tender young crops in the bud. You can picture farmers, hopeful after a long winter, looking at their fields with growing concern. The familiar patterns of the seasons seem to be stuttering out of sync. One quirky detail from the time is the appearance of a persistent dry fog or haze in many areas, particularly in the northeastern United States. This wasn't a water-based fog, but a dimming of the sunlight by the stratospheric aerosols, sometimes giving the sun a reddish or bluish tint and making it appear less bright even at midday. People reported that the sun could be looked at directly without discomfort, a very unusual and unsettling experience. It must have felt like living under a perpetual, thin veil. Imagine the hushed conversations, the prayers for warmth, the rising anxiety as April turns to May, and summer still refuses to arrive. Did we offend someone important upstairs? People might have joked, though with a growing unease. Maybe we should have sacrificed more. Turnips? Does anyone know what the sun god actually likes? Crucially, no one at this time understood the connection between Tambora's eruption on a distant Indonesian island and the bizarre weather they were experiencing. The science of volcanology was in its infancy, and the concept of global atmospheric circulation carrying volcanic debris around the world to affect climate simply wasn't known. News traveled incredibly slowly then, by sailing ship, by horse-drawn carriage. Detailed accounts of Tambora's eruption wouldn't reach Europe or North America for many months, even years, and even then, the link to the weather would not be immediately obvious. Historians still debate how quickly even rudimentary information about such a distant catastrophe might have spread, and whether any contemporary scientific minds even began to speculate about a possible connection before the full impact of the year without a summer was felt. For most people, the strange, cold, dark conditions were a profound and terrifying mystery. Was it a divine punishment, a sign of the apocalypse, or just an exceptionally, inexplicably bad run of weather? This lack of understanding, this complete bewilderment, must have amplified the fear and uncertainty immeasurably. You feel a sense of foreboding, knowing that the worst is yet to come, as this reluctant spring of 1816 prepares to give way to a summer that will never truly arrive. The calendar turns to June 1816. This is when things go from merely strange to utterly bewildering, particularly in parts of New England and eastern Canada, as well as across much of Western Europe. You're a farmer in Vermont, let's say. You've replanted your corn crop twice already because of late frosts in April and May. You're hopeful, anxiously watching the sky, praying for the warmth that should be settling in by now. Instead, on June 6th, you wake up to snow. Not just a light dusting, but inches of heavy, wet snow blanketing your fields, weighing down tree branches, and bringing an unearthly, wintry silence to what should be a vibrant early summer landscape. You can imagine the sheer disbelief, the crushing despair. Birds, confused by the unseasonable cold, are reportedly found frozen in the fields. Newly shorn sheep shiver and die of exposure. It's a scene so out of sync with the natural order that it must have felt apocalyptic. A mainstream historical fact is that these June snowfalls were well documented in places like Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, and Quebec, with some areas reporting drifts of over a foot. Similar unseasonable cold snaps, though not always with snow, plagued parts of Europe. The psychological impact on people must have been immense. Their entire rhythm of life, so dependent on the predictable cycle of seasons, was thrown into chaos. You can almost hear the hushed, fearful whispers. What have we done to anger God? Or is the world ending? Superstitions would have run rampant. Ministers and preachers likely delivered fervent sermons, interpreting the bizarre weather as a sign of divine displeasure or a call for repentance. It's hard for us, in our world of instant weather forecasts and scientific explanations, even if we don't always understand them, to fully grasp the terror of the unknown that these people faced. Their Bibles might have been their only comfort, or perhaps their greatest source of fear, as they searched for an explanation. One quirky detail from this period is the reported increase in religious fervor and apocalyptic speculation. Millenarian movements, predicting the imminent end of the world, gained traction in some areas as people struggled to make sense of the seemingly inexplicable hostility of nature. It's like the ultimate "the sky is falling" scenario, only it was actually sort of happening, but with cold instead of just sky. The immediate concern, beyond the sheer shock, was for the crops. Corn, a staple in North America, was particularly hard hit, as it requires warm temperatures to mature. Wheat, potatoes, and hay also suffered immensely across the northern hemisphere. What little did manage to grow was often stunted or blighted by the persistent cold and lack of sunshine. You can feel the gnawing anxiety building in communities as they watch their food supply for the coming winter shrivel on the stalk or rot in the damp, cold ground. The price of grains would have already started to creep up, driven by scarcity and hoarding. Academics still debate the precise interplay of the volcanic cooling with other pre-existing socio-economic conditions in different regions. For example, Europe was just emerging from the Napoleonic Wars, which had already strained resources and economies. Did the year without a summer exacerbate an existing crisis, or was it the primary driver of the hardships that followed? The answer likely varies from place to place, but there's no doubt that the Tambora aerosols turned a difficult situation into a desperate one for many. As June gives way to an equally chilly and disappointing July and August, the full scale of the impending agricultural disaster begins to dawn, casting a long, cold shadow over the world. The failed summer of 1816 bleeds into a grim autumn across the northern hemisphere. You're in New England, perhaps, and the vibrant fall colors you'd normally expect are muted, the trees having struggled through a season of insufficient warmth and light. The meager harvests are in, and they are, to put it mildly, disastrous. Corn, as you know, was decimated. Wheat and oat yields are a fraction of their usual bounty. Even hardy crops like potatoes and turnips have suffered. You can feel the chill in the air deepen, not just from the advancing season, but from the icy grip of impending hunger and hardship. The granaries are far from full, and the lean months of winter loom, promising to be even more brutal than usual. In North America, particularly the northeastern United States and Canada, the economic fallout is immediate and severe. Farmers, who formed the backbone of the economy, have little to sell and little to feed their own families. You can imagine the desperate calculations, how to stretch the few bushels of blighted grain, which livestock to slaughter, because there's no fodder to keep them alive through the winter. The price of what little food is available on the markets skyrockets. A mainstream historical fact is that grain prices in some parts of the U.S. increased severalfold, in some cases, like oats, by as much as 8 times their normal value. This inflation hit everyone, from farmers to city dwellers, rich and poor, though naturally the poor suffered most acutely. Families who were already struggling were pushed to the brink of starvation. You might see families resorting to foraging for whatever wild edibles they could find, nuts, berries, roots, things they might have ignored in more plentiful years. This widespread hardship triggered a wave of migration. You can picture families packing their meager belongings onto wagons, abandoning their barren farms in places like Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, and heading west towards the Ohio Valley and beyond, seeking more fertile land and a more forgiving climate. This westward expansion was already underway, but the year without a summer, or 1800 and froze to death, as it was grimly nicknamed in New England, significantly accelerated it. It's a desperate gamble, leaving behind everything you know for an uncertain future, but for many, staying put meant certain destitution. It's a classic human response to crisis. When things get unbearable, you move. No one was singing "Go West, Young Man" just yet, but the sentiment was definitely in the air, probably with more of a "Go West" or "We'll literally starve" kind of urgency. Communities try to cope as best they can. You see towns organizing relief efforts, churches collecting donations for the needy, but the scale of the crisis often overwhelms these local initiatives. There are reports of food riots in some areas, as desperate people, seeing merchants hoarding grain or charging exorbitant prices, take matters into their own hands. It's a tense, anxious time. One quirky detail that emerged from this period in some rural communities was a renewed interest in dowsing or water witching, not just for water, but sometimes people hoped dowsers could locate lost livestock or even hidden caches of food. When conventional methods fail and understanding is absent, people often turn to the unconventional or the supernatural for answers or solutions. The impact wasn't just on food. The lack of oats meant horses, the primary mode of transportation, and farm power were weak and expensive to maintain. This hampered trade, travel, and even the delivery of mail. The entire rhythm of the agricultural economy was disrupted. Historians still debate the full extent to which the economic downturn following 1816 contributed to later financial panics, like the Panic of 1819 in the United States. While the failed harvests were a direct and immediate shock, the longer-term ripple effects on credit, investment, and interregional trade are complex and harder to precisely quantify. Was the year without a summer a short, sharp shock from which the economy quickly recovered, or did it inflict deeper, more lasting wounds that played a role in subsequent economic instability? The evidence suggests that for many individuals and regions, especially in New England, the recovery was slow and painful, and the memory of 1800 and froze to death would linger for generations, a chilling reminder of nature's power to disrupt human affairs. You feel the gnawing uncertainty of the time, the fear that the seasons themselves had become unhinged, and the desperate hope that next year, surely, summer would return. Across the Atlantic in Europe, the summer of 1816 unfolds with a similar, chilling narrative of failed crops, unseasonable cold, and relentless rain. You find yourself in Switzerland, perhaps, or southwestern Germany, or Ireland, regions that were particularly hard hit. The vineyards that should be heavy with ripening grapes are barren, the vines stunted and diseased from the constant damp and lack of sun. Potato fields, a critical food source especially for the poor, are blighted, the tubers rotting in the cold, waterlogged earth. Grain harvests are abysmal. The picturesque European countryside, usually gearing up for a bountiful autumn harvest, is instead a landscape of agricultural devastation. You can almost smell the mildew and decay, feel the persistent, bone-chilling dampness that seeps into everything. The consequences are, predictably, famine and soaring food prices. A mainstream historical fact is that the periods from 1816 to 1819 saw widespread famine across many parts of Western Europe, with Switzerland, for example, experiencing one of the worst famines in its history. Bread, the staple of most diets, became a luxury item. People were forced to eat whatever they could find: cats, dogs, rats, boiled nettles, tree bark, and grass. There are harrowing contemporary accounts of emaciated figures wandering the countryside, begging for food, their faces etched with hunger and despair. You see soup kitchens being set up in towns and cities, often overwhelmed by the sheer number of starving people. Governments, still recovering from the immense costs and disruptions of the Napoleonic Wars, which had only just concluded in 1815, struggled to respond effectively. Some implemented price controls or banned food exports, but these measures often proved insufficient or were enacted too late. It's a grim picture, a continent plunged into a subsistence crisis, not by war, but by an invisible enemy in the atmosphere. Disease inevitably followed hunger. Malnourished populations are always more susceptible to illness, and the year without a summer saw outbreaks of typhus, often called famine fever, dysentery, and other diseases linked to poor nutrition and unsanitary conditions. Hospitals, already basic by modern standards, were overwhelmed. You can imagine the fear, not just of starvation, but of the fevers and plagues that seemed to stalk the land. One quirky, though tragic detail is that in some areas, the desperate hunger led people to consume spoiled grain or seeds treated with chemicals like arsenic, then sometimes used to prevent rot in seed grain, leading to accidental poisonings on top of everything else. It highlights the sheer desperation people faced when their normal food sources vanished. Is this slightly green, moldy bread going to kill me? Probably. Am I going to eat it anyway? Absolutely. The grim humor of desperation. Social unrest became widespread. Food riots erupted in many towns and cities across Britain, France, Germany, and Switzerland. You might witness a crowd of hungry, angry people attacking a bakery or a grain merchant's warehouse, demanding bread at fair prices, or simply seizing what they could. These weren't organized rebellions, but spontaneous outbursts of desperation. Soldiers were often called out to quell the disturbances, leading to violent clashes. The authorities, fearing a breakdown of law and order, responded with a mixture of relief efforts and repression. Historians still debate the extent to which the widespread social unrest of 1816 to 1817 contributed to broader political agitations and reforms in the following decades. While the immediate trigger was food scarcity, did the experience of government inadequacy and popular suffering sow seeds of discontent that would later flower into more organized political movements? It's a complex question, as many other factors were at play, But the Hunger Years certainly exposed the fragility of the existing social and economic order. You can feel the simmering anger and desperation, a dangerous cocktail in a society already on edge after years of war and upheaval. The cold, dark summer was breeding not just hunger, but also a profound sense of injustice and fear for the future. The chilling tendrils of Tambora's atmospheric legacy reached far beyond Europe and North America, wrapping themselves around the entire globe, and Asia was no exception. You find yourself now shifting your perspective to the vast and varied landscapes of this continent, where millions also faced a period of profound disruption and hardship. While the narrative of snow in June might be specific to certain northern latitudes, the impact here was equally devastating, often manifesting through disruptions to the vital monsoon seasons that governed the agricultural lifeblood of entire regions. In China, particularly in provinces like Yunnan in the southwest, the year 1816 brought unseasonable cold, persistent rains, and even summer frosts or snows in some highland areas. You can imagine the rice paddies, which depend on warm, wet conditions, failing catastrophically. Farmers, relying on centuries of accumulated wisdom about planting seasons and weather patterns, would have been utterly bewildered by the sky's betrayal. Accounts from the period describe widespread famine, with rice production plummeting and people resorting to desperate measures to survive. A mainstream historical fact is that the Qing dynasty records from Yunnan and other southern provinces document significant agricultural distress and pleas for imperial relief due to the anomalous weather of 1816 to 1817. The mandate of heaven, the traditional Chinese concept that legitimized rulers through their ability to ensure harmony and prosperity, including favorable weather, would have felt severely shaken for local populations. Further south in India, Tambora's atmospheric veil played havoc with the crucial summer monsoon. This wasn't necessarily about snow, but about a fundamental disruption to the weather patterns that sustained life. Some areas experienced severe drought, as the expected rains failed to materialize, while others, paradoxically, may have suffered from unseasonal deluges and flooding as atmospheric circulation patterns went haywire. You can picture the parched fields cracking under a relentless sun in one region, while in another, swollen rivers engulf villages and destroy crops. The impact on agriculture was immense, leading to widespread food shortages and famine across various parts of the subcontinent. It's a stark reminder that a year without a summer didn't just mean cold, it meant a fundamental derangement of the planet's climate system. Normally, we get just enough rain, a farmer might lament. This year, it's either a desert or a biblical flood. There's no in between. I think the weather gods are drunk. It is in India that one of the most devastating long-term consequences of Tambora's fallout began to emerge. The environmental stress, the contaminated water sources from erratic rains and floods, and the movement of desperate, malnourished people are strongly linked by many scientists and historians to the emergence of a new, particularly virulent strain of cholera. This new strain appeared around Bengal, near Calcutta, in 1817. One quirky, or rather terrifying detail is that this specific strain of cholera, Vibrio cholerae O1 biotype L-Tor, was incredibly resilient and highly contagious. It wasn't just a local outbreak. It was the beginning of the first great cholera pandemic, which would then spread out from India along trade routes, eventually reaching across Asia into the Middle East, Europe, and even North America over the following decades, killing millions. While cholera had existed before, this Tambora linked strain took its lethality and transmissibility to a new global level. Historians and epidemiologists still debate the precise mechanisms and the exact weight of Tambora's influence versus other contributing factors in the emergence and spread of this cholera pandemic. However, the timing and the scale of environmental disruption in the region provide a compelling, if grim, connection. It's a chilling example of how a single geological event on a remote island could trigger a cascade of interconnected crises: climate change, famine, and then a deadly global pandemic. You can feel the insidious spread of this disease, a microscopic consequence of a volcanic cataclysm, hitching a ride with unsuspecting travelers and merchants, an invisible passenger bringing misery and death wherever it landed. The suffering caused by the year without a summer wasn't confined to just that one year. Its shadows, like that of the cholera pandemic, would stretch for decades. Okay, here is the next part of Act 2. The long, cold shadow of Tambora's atmospheric veil extended far beyond the Western world, reaching deep into Asia, where it wrought havoc on ancient agricultural rhythms and vast populations. You find yourself now in your mind's eye in southern China, perhaps in Yunnan province, a region known for its terraced rice paddies and intricate irrigation systems. But in 1816, the familiar patterns are broken. The normally reliable monsoon rains, vital for the rice crop, are erratic. In some areas, they fail to arrive, leading to drought and parched fields. In others, as in the Yangtze Valley, they come as torrential downpours and unseasonable cold, causing massive floods that drown the young rice plants and destroy dikes and villages. You can imagine the despair of farmers, their livelihoods dependent on a delicate balance of sun and rain, now facing a climate gone haywire. Reports from the time describe summer snowfalls in parts of Jiangxi and Anhui provinces, something utterly unheard of, and frost-damaging crops even in normally subtropical regions. The impact on the rice harvest, the staple food for hundreds of millions, was catastrophic in affected areas. A mainstream historical fact is that Yunnan province, in particular, suffered a devastating famine. The delicate rice seedlings couldn't withstand the cold, and grain prices soared. There are harrowing accounts from local gazettes and personal diaries describing widespread starvation, people resorting to eating clay, tree bark, or whatever they could forage. Social order in the worst-hit regions began to break down, with reports of banditry and desperate families sometimes making unimaginable choices to survive. One contemporary poet from Yunnan even described a mother choosing to drown her child rather than watch it starve to death, a chilling testament to the depths of human suffering. It's a stark reminder that while the year without a summer is often framed through a Western lens, its impact was truly global and profoundly tragic in many parts of Asia. Further south in India, Tambora's aerosols played a different kind of deadly game, primarily by disrupting the Indian summer monsoon. This colossal weather system, which brings life-giving rains to the subcontinent, was delayed and weakened. This led to drought in some areas, devastating crops. But the altered weather patterns had an even more sinister consequence. They are strongly linked to the outbreak and spread of a new, virulent strain of cholera. A quirky, or rather horrifying detail is that the cholera bacterium, which was endemic to the Ganges Delta in Bengal, appears to have mutated or found new pathways to spread due to the unusual environmental conditions created by the volcanic winter, first drought, then late unseasonal flooding. This new strain of cholera was particularly deadly. From its origin in Bengal in 1817, though the environmental conditions were set up by the 1816 climate, it began to spread with terrifying speed. This wasn't just a local outbreak, it was the beginning of the first true global cholera pandemic. Carried along trade routes, by ship and by land, it would eventually reach across Asia, into the Middle East, Africa, Europe, and even North America, killing millions over the following decades. Historians and epidemiologists still debate the precise mechanisms and pathways of this first cholera pandemic and the exact role of the Tambora climate anomaly versus other contributing factors like troop movements or existing sanitary conditions. However, the link between the environmental disruption caused by the year without a summer and the emergence and initial spread of this deadly new form of cholera in Bengal is a strong and sobering one. You can almost visualize the invisible microbes thriving in the disrupted ecology of the Bay of Bengal, embarking on their own grim journey around the world, a second wave of death unleashed by Tambora, long after its ashes had settled. The suffering wasn't just from empty bellies, it was from bodies racked by a terrifying new disease, adding another layer of horror to this already calamitous period. The interconnectedness of the world, even in the early 19th century, meant that a volcanic eruption on a remote Indonesian island could trigger not just global cooling and famine, but also a global pandemic. It makes you think twice about complaining when your flight is delayed by a minor ash cloud, doesn't it? Oh no, my vacation plans are slightly inconvenienced. Meanwhile, in 1817, my distant ancestors are possibly inventing a new plague because the sky went weird. As 1816 dragged on, a year defined by its biting chill, relentless rains, or unyielding drought, you see a world grappling not just with physical hardship, but with a profound psychological and existential crisis. The sun, that life-giving celestial body, seemed to have dimmed, its warmth stolen by an unseen force. Imagine the daily anxiety, waking each morning to scan the sky, hoping for a sign that the natural order was returning, only to be met with the same sullen, gray, or unnaturally colored firmament. This pervasive gloom, this feeling that the world itself was out of joint, had a deep impact on the human psyche. Desperation, as you've seen, led to food riots, migrations, and tragic choices. But alongside the despair, you also witness incredible human resilience and attempts at adaptation. In communities facing starvation, people learned to make do with less, to share what little they had, or to find new, sometimes unpalatable, sources of sustenance. You might see ingenious, if often inadequate, attempts to protect fragile crops from the cold, covering them with blankets or canvas, burning smoky fires in fields hoping to ward off frost. Farmers in some regions, like New England, began to shift towards hardier crops or livestock that could better withstand the unpredictable weather, like certain breeds of sheep instead of relying so heavily on corn. A mainstream historical fact is that the agricultural crisis of 1816 did spur some innovation and diversification in farming practices in the long run, as people learned hard lessons about reliance on single crops or specific weather patterns. The lack of scientific understanding of what was happening, that a volcano half a world away had essentially thrown a dimmer switch on the planet, fueled widespread fear and superstition. Many, as you can imagine, interpreted the year without a summer as divine punishment for humanity's sins. Churches and chapels would have been filled with fervent worshippers praying for deliverance. Apocalyptic prophecies resurfaced, and unusual celestial events, like those lurid sunsets or the appearance of sunspots, which were indeed observed by some astronomers at the time, though their connection to the weather was not understood, were seen as ominous portents. One quirky detail is the proliferation of folk theories and scapegoats. Some people blamed lightning rods, a relatively new invention by Benjamin Franklin, believing they were somehow interfering with the natural balance of the atmosphere and causing the cold. Others might have blamed local witches or looked for explanations in unusual animal behavior. When the known world turns upside down, the human mind scrambles for any explanation, however far-fetched. It's easier to blame a faulty lightning rod than to comprehend an invisible, global atmospheric veil of volcanic aerosols. I knew we shouldn't have installed that pointy metal thing on the barn. Old Man Weatherby said it'd anger the sky spirits, and look what happened. Yet, amidst the superstition, there were also the faint stirrings of more rational inquiry, even if the conclusions were often incorrect. Some early scientists and amateur meteorologists meticulously recorded the bizarre weather, the temperature fluctuations, the atmospheric phenomena. They exchanged letters, published observations in fledgling scientific journals, and tried to find patterns or causes. Historians still debate whether the year without a summer significantly spurred the development of meteorology as a more systematic science. While the true cause remained elusive for decades, the sheer abnormality of the weather of 1816 forced people to observe, record, and question in new ways. It highlighted the interconnectedness of global weather systems, even if the mechanisms were a mystery. You can sense the frustration of these early observers, diligently noting the frost in July or the price of wheat, yet unable to grasp the planetary scale of the event that bound their local miseries together with those of people thousands of miles away. The world in 1816 was a vast, interconnected system, but humanity's understanding of that system was only just beginning to dawn. The chilling reality of that year underscored in the most brutal way how vulnerable societies were to forces of nature they could neither predict nor comprehend. The relentless chill of 1816, the year without a summer, eventually began to loosen its grip, but the world it left behind was irrevocably changed. As 1817 dawned, and then 1818, you can imagine a slow, hesitant return to something resembling normalcy in the climate. The vast veil of Tambura's stratospheric aerosols gradually thinned, dissipating over several years, allowing more sunlight to reach the Earth's surface. Summers, when they finally reappeared, might have been greeted with a joy and relief that's hard for us to fathom. The simple warmth of the sun on skin, the sight of healthy crops growing in the fields, These would have felt like miracles after the darkness and cold. You can almost hear a collective, global sigh of relief as the seasons began to realign, though the recovery was patchy, and the memory of that grim year was seared into the collective consciousness. The immediate aftermath, however, was still one of hardship for many regions. Food reserves were depleted. The famines that began in 1816 continued into 1817 and even later in some areas, as it took time for agricultural production to recover fully and for food prices to stabilize. The economic dislocations, the disruptions to trade, the bankruptcies, the displacement of people didn't vanish overnight. You see societies slowly, painfully, trying to rebuild. In Europe, governments, having grappled with food riots and widespread suffering, initiated various, often inadequate relief efforts. A mainstream historical fact is that this period saw increased debate about poverty, public welfare, and the responsibilities of the state, with the crisis highlighting the vulnerabilities of the existing social systems. Some historians argue that the experience of the Hunger Years contributed to later reforms in poor laws and public health, though this was a slow and contested process. The Great Migrations triggered by the crisis continued. In North America, the westward flow of people from New England and other hard-hit eastern regions didn't stop when the weather improved. The Ohio fever, or Genesee fever, as the pull towards new lands was called, intensified. Families had been uprooted, farms abandoned. For many, there was no going back. They sought new beginnings in what they hoped would be more fertile and climatically stable regions. This reshaped the demographic map of the United States, accelerating westward expansion and the displacement of Native American populations. It's a stark reminder that environmental crises can be powerful drivers of human movement and societal change. It wasn't just about finding a place where the corn would grow. It was about finding hope after a period of profound despair. Imagine the stories carried west, tales of snow in June and frozen birds, becoming part of the folklore of these new frontier settlements. Back in Vermont in 16, we had to eat our boots. Well, almost. They were mostly just very, very cold. One quirky detail from the recovery period is how different plant and animal populations responded. Some species that had struggled during the cold years might have rebounded quickly, while others took longer. There are anecdotal accounts of changes in fish migrations or bird populations in the years immediately following 1816, as ecosystems slowly rebalanced. Farmers, too, were more cautious, perhaps more willing to experiment with different crop varieties or planting techniques, having learned the bitter lesson of relying on a single, vulnerable system. There was a subtle but lasting shift in agricultural thinking in some regions. Even as the weather returned to more familiar patterns, the mystery of what had caused the year without a summer lingered. While the immediate focus was on survival and recovery, the unprecedented nature of the event left a deep impression. The direct link to Mount Tambora's eruption wasn't widely understood or accepted for many decades. Early scientific speculation, as you know, was often off the mark, focusing on sunspots or other terrestrial phenomena. Historians still debate how quickly the correct volcanic explanation began to gain traction within the scientific community and then among the wider public. The slow pace of communication and the sheer scale of the global climate system made it difficult to connect the dots. You can feel that lingering uncertainty, that sense that the world could, without warning or clear explanation, turn hostile. This is a profound experience of a global climate anomaly, even without full comprehension of its cause, would subtly shape scientific inquiry and perhaps even the popular imagination for years to come, paving the way for a deeper understanding of our planet's interconnected systems. The immediate crisis of 1800 and froze to death eventually passed, but its echoes resonated through the decades, leaving indelible marks on science, culture, and society. You can see this period not just as a time of suffering, but also as an unintentional, massive global experiment, the results of which slowly began to shape human understanding and innovation. The puzzle of that missing summer, the strange atmospheric phenomena, and the widespread hardship became a catalyst for new ways of thinking and creating. In the realm of science, the year without a summer provided a compelling, if initially baffling, data point. While the direct link to Tambra took time to be firmly established and widely accepted, the bizarre weather of 1816 spurred increased meteorological observation. You can imagine scientists and amateur weather watchers alike driven by a desire to understand such extreme deviations, becoming more meticulous in their record keeping, developing better instruments, and looking for patterns. A mainstream historical fact is that the event contributed to the nascent understanding that climate was not static and could be subject to dramatic, global-scale shifts. Though the mechanisms were unclear, the experience of 1816 pushed some to consider that events in one part of the world could have profound atmospheric consequences elsewhere. It laid some of the conceptual groundwork for the later development of climatology and atmospheric science. The eventual scientific explanation of Tambra's impact, the role of stratospheric aerosols reflecting sunlight, became a cornerstone in understanding volcanic impacts on climate. Culturally, the gloom and hardship of 1816 famously cast a long shadow, or perhaps more accurately, a spark, in the world of literature. The most iconic example comes from the shores of Lake Geneva in Switzerland. There, a group of young English writers, including Lord Byron, Percy Bysshe Shelley, Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin, later Mary Shelley, and John Polidori, found their summer vacation of 1816 ruined by the incessant rain and cold. Confined indoors at the Villa Diodati, they famously amused themselves by reading ghost stories, and then, at Byron's suggestion, by trying their hand at writing their own. You can almost feel the oppressive, melancholic atmosphere of that wet, ungenial summer seeping into their imaginations. The result, just Mary Shelley began to conceive the story of Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, a tale born out of dark, stormy nights and discussions about galvanism and the nature of life. John Polidori, Byron's physician, penned The Vampire, a story that would become a foundational text for the romantic vampire genre. It's a quirky and fascinating detail of literary history that two such enduring figures of horror fiction emerged from the gloom of a single, volcanically induced bad summer. It makes you wonder what masterpieces might be written if everyone's Wi-Fi went out for a few weeks. The weather outside is frightful, but the creativity is so delightful. The impact wasn't just on Gothic literature. The dramatic sunsets and atmospheric effects witnessed during this period, as mentioned earlier with J.M.W. Turner, influenced landscape painting. The memory of famine and hardship also found its way into folk songs and local histories, becoming a cautionary tale passed down through generations. Historians still debate the extent to which the agricultural crisis spurred specific technological innovations. One oft cited example is the invention of the Draisine, or Laufmaschine, running machine, by Baron Karl von Drais in Germany in 1817. This two-wheeled, steerable machine, a precursor to the bicycle, was reportedly developed in response to widespread starvation and slaughter of horses due to the lack of oats in 1816. If you couldn't afford to feed your horse, or if there were simply fewer horses available, a personal human-powered vehicle became an attractive alternative. So in a roundabout way, the year without a summer might have helped put humanity on the path to pedal power. You see the tendrils of this single, catastrophic volcanic event, reaching into so many different aspects of human life, long after the skies cleared. It served as a stark, albeit poorly understood at the time, lesson in global interconnectedness and vulnerability. It's a reminder that our planet is a dynamic system and that events in one remote corner can have far-reaching and unexpected consequences for all. The slow unraveling of its cause and effects contributed to a more complex and nuanced understanding of the natural world, even as its immediate impact brought so much suffering. As our exploration of 1816, the year without a summer, draws to its conclusion, you're left with a sense of how a single, massive natural event can echo through history, shaping not just the lives of those who endured it, but also our understanding of the world today. The memory of that chilling, sunless year, once a raw and immediate experience of hardship, has transformed into a crucial historical and scientific case study, a stark reminder of our planet's power and its intricate climate systems. You can almost feel the shift from fearful bewilderment in 1816 to the more informed, though still odd, perspective we have now, looking back with the benefit of 2 centuries of scientific advancement. Today, the year without a summer is more than just a historical curiosity. It serves as a vital analog for understanding the potential impacts of major volcanic eruptions on global climate. A mainstream historical fact is that the data gleaned from ice cores, tree rings, historical records, and geological analysis of Tambora's eruption and its aftermath are used by climate scientists to model and predict what might happen if a similar scale eruption occurred in our modern, much more populous and interconnected world. It's a sobering thought. While we now understand the cause, our global society, with its complex supply chains and reliance on stable agricultural output, remains highly vulnerable to such events. The ghost of Tambora serves as a constant, chilling reminder of the planet's capacity for sudden, dramatic change. The cultural reverberations, too, continue. Beyond Frankenstein and the vampire, the story of 1816 has itself become a recurring motif in popular science writing, historical fiction, and documentaries. It's a narrative that encapsulates so much: mystery, disaster, human suffering, resilience, and the slow dawn of scientific understanding. One quirky detail is how often the event is invoked in discussions about climate change. While the cause was different, a natural volcanic event versus human-induced greenhouse gas emissions, the experience of 1816 offers a glimpse into what a rapidly destabilized climate can look like: crop failures, extreme weather, and widespread social disruption. It makes the abstract concept of global temperature change feel much more concrete and visceral. It's like Mother Nature ran a terrifyingly effective PSA. Don't mess with the thermostat, kids. You really won't like the results. Historians and climate scientists still debate some of the finer details of the Tambora event and its aftermath. For instance, precisely how much did pre existing conditions, like the recently ended Napoleonic Wars or regional socio-economic vulnerabilities, amplify the suffering caused by the volcanic cooling? And were there other, smaller volcanic eruptions around the same period that might have contributed to the prolonged cooling, or was Tambora the sole colossal culprit for that specific year? These questions continue to drive research, refining our understanding of this critical period. The Year Without a Summer is not a closed book. It's a dynamic field of study that continues to yield insights into climate science, social history, and human adaptation. Ultimately, the story of 1816 is a profound lesson in humility and interconnectedness. It underscores our dependence on a stable climate and the far-reaching consequences that can arise when that stability is disturbed, whether by natural forces or human actions. You see the faces of those who lived through it, the anxious farmers, the hungry families, the bewildered sky watchers, and you feel a connection to their struggle, their resilience. Their experience, once a terrifying present, is now our shared past, a solemn chapter in the long human journey of learning to live on this dynamic and sometimes dangerous planet. The sun may have dimmed in 1816, but the human spirit, though severely tested, eventually found its way back to the light, carrying with it the seeds of new knowledge and a deeper respect for the forces that shape our world. Now, as our account of this chilling year concludes, let the images of darkened skies, frosted fields, and huddled figures gently fade. The story of 1816, the year without a summer, with its unexpected hardships and profound global impact, can now become a distant echo, a hushed whisper from the past as you prepare for your own peaceful rest. Allow the memory of that unseasonable cold to be replaced by the comfortable warmth of your present surroundings. The anxieties of those who faced failing crops and an uncertain future can dissolve, leaving behind only a quiet appreciation for the stability and abundance you may know. Let the gray, veiled sun of 1816 give way to the gentle darkness of your room, a darkness that invites sleep and rejuvenation. The strange, lurid sunsets described by bewildered onlookers can now transform into the soft, natural fade of twilight in your mind's eye, a calm and predictable transition. There are no more mysteries to solve tonight about atmospheric aerosols or volcanic impacts. There is only the steady, gentle rhythm of your own breathing, a comforting and reliable presence. The struggles for sustenance, the long journeys in search of better fortunes, all these can recede into the quiet annals of history. You are safe, you are comfortable, and the world outside your window is, for tonight, at peace. Allow yourself to drift, like a slowly clearing sky after a long storm, into a deep and untroubled slumber. Hey friends, tonight we are stepping into a world of sacred fire, solemn vows, and some seriously long-term commitments, deep in the heart of ancient Rome. Imagine dedicating 30 years of your life, starting as a young girl, to a single crucial task, living in a special, privileged, yet highly restricted community, all while holding the spiritual well-being of an entire empire in your hands. That's the unique and demanding life of the Vestal Virgins we're exploring tonight. You're probably thinking, wow, 30 years. That's longer than most of my streaming subscriptions last. And you'd be right. Let's be honest, dropped into that world with its strict rules, public scrutiny, and the rather terrifying consequences for breaking your vows, not to mention no social media to vent about your boss, the Pontifex Maximus, you probably wouldn't survive the intense pressure or the surprisingly complex daily routines. It makes a modern corporate job look like a walk in the park, a park where you don't get buried alive if you mess up. So before you get too comfortable, go ahead and take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to see where you're all tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Drop a comment below. Now, turn off your lights, turn on your fan for some gentle white noise, and let's begin tonight's journey. You find yourself standing in the bustling heart of the Roman Forum, sometime during the height of the empire. The air is filled with the murmur of Latin voices, the distant clatter of chariot wheels on stone, the scent of baking bread, and perhaps a hint of incense drifting from a nearby temple. But your attention is drawn to a serene and sacred precinct nestled amidst the grandeur, the Temple of Vesta and the adjoining Atrium Vestae, the house of the Vestal Virgins. This is the spiritual hearth of Rome, and its guardians are a select group of women who hold a unique and revered position in Roman society. You see one of them now, perhaps, moving with a quiet dignity, her distinctive white robes and headdress setting her apart from the throng. She is a Vestal, a priestess of Vesta, the Roman goddess of the hearth, home, and family. The origins of the Vestal Virgins are ancient, stretching back into the mists of Rome's legendary founding. Tradition holds that they were established by Numa Pompilius, the second king of Rome, a Sabine known for his piety and his efforts to formalize Roman religious institutions in the 7th century BCE. You can imagine him, a wise and perhaps somewhat mystical figure, recognizing the profound importance of the sacred flame, a symbol of the city's continuity, its undying strength, and the well-being of every Roman household. He decreed that this fire, representing the eternal life of Rome, should never be allowed to go out. And who better to tend this vital flame than a group of priestesses dedicated solely to this sacred duty, their purity reflecting the sanctity of the flame itself. A mainstream historical fact is that the Vestals were Rome's only full-time female priesthood, a testament to their unique importance in a predominantly male-dominated religious sphere. The selection of a new Vestal was a serious and formal affair. When a vacancy arose, usually due to the death of a Vestal or the completion of her term, the Pontifex Maximus, Rome's chief priest, would choose a young girl, typically between the ages of 6 and 10. She had to be a patrician from one of Rome's noble families and free from any physical imperfections. Her parents also had to be alive and of good standing. You can picture the scene: a young girl, perhaps playing with her dolls one moment, then suddenly finding herself chosen for this immense honor and lifelong, 30-year-long responsibility. The selection process involved a ritual phrase uttered by the Pontifex Maximus, Amata te Capio, meaning "Beloved, I take you," formally removing her from her father's authority and dedicating her to the service of Vesta. One quirky detail is that once chosen, a Vestal's hair was ritually cut off and hung on a sacred tree, symbolizing her transition into her new life and her separation from her former familial ties. It's a powerful image of renunciation and dedication. Their new home, the Atrium Vestae, was a grand and spacious building located near the Temple of Vesta in the Forum. It was a surprisingly luxurious complex with multiple stories, courtyards, pools, and private rooms for each Vestal, along with kitchens, mills, and official reception areas. Here, the newly chosen girl would begin her 30-year term of service. This term was divided into 3 distinct decades. The first 10 years were spent learning the intricate rituals, duties, and traditions of the Vestals from the older priestesses. The second decade was dedicated to performing these sacred duties, including the all-important tending of the eternal flame, and the final 10 years were spent teaching the novices. Historians still debate the exact curriculum of their training. Beyond the practicalities of tending the fire and preparing sacred substances, how much theological or philosophical education did they receive? Were they literate, and did they have access to sacred texts or historical records kept within the temple? The evidence is sparse, but their long training implies a significant body of knowledge to be mastered. You can imagine the hushed atmosphere within the Atrium Vestae, a place of quiet routine, ancient ritual, and the constant, gentle flicker of the sacred flame that bound them all together in their solemn duty. The heart of a Vestal virgin's existence, the very reason for her sacred calling, pulsed within the small, circular temple of Vesta, located just steps from their grand residence, the Atrium Vestae. You find yourself now standing before this modest yet profoundly significant structure in the Roman Forum. Unlike many other Roman temples with their towering columns and grand statues of deities, the Temple of Vesta was relatively small, intimate, and round, designed to evoke the shape of an ancient Roman hut, a symbolic link to the earliest hearths of the city. Its roof had a central opening, not for a statue, but to allow the smoke from the sacred fire to escape, because within this temple burned the Ignis Vestae, the eternal flame of Rome. This wasn't just any fire. It was believed to be intrinsically linked to the city's Pax Deorum, the peace with the gods, and its continued existence. If the flame of Vesta went out, it was considered a dire omen, a sign that the goddess had withdrawn her protection from Rome, portending disaster. Imagine the immense weight of responsibility resting on the shoulders of the 6 Vestals who shared this duty. Their primary unceasing task was to ensure that this sacred flame never ever died. They worked in shifts, day and night, their lives revolving around its constant care. You can picture a Vestal in the hushed, shadowy interior of the temple, the only light often coming from the flame itself. The air would be warm, filled with the scent of burning oak, the traditional wood used, and perhaps the subtle aroma of sacred offerings. Her movements would be precise, reverent, as she carefully added fuel, cleared away ash, and ensured the flame burned brightly and cleanly. A mainstream historical fact is that if the sacred flame did go out, it was a catastrophic event, and the Vestal on duty at the time was held directly responsible. The punishment was severe. She would be scourged by the Pontifex Maximus in a darkened room. The flame then had to be relit, not from another fire, but through a primitive method, usually by friction, by rubbing pieces of wood together, or by using a concave mirror to focus the sun's rays, a process emphasizing purity and a new beginning. The Vestal's attire was also distinctive, a visual marker of their sacred status. You see them clad in long white woolen robes, often described as being archaic in style, harking back to earlier Roman times. Their headdress, the infula, consisted of woolen fillets, or bands wrapped around the head, from which 6 bands called vitae hung down, 3 on each side. This was topped by a white suffibulum, a type of rectangular veil or hood pinned with a fibula. Their hair was styled in a specific traditional way known as the seni crines, or 6 tresses, a style also worn by brides on their wedding day, perhaps symbolizing their status as perpetual brides of the state, or their purity. One quirky detail is that despite their vow of virginity and their sacred role, the Vestals were not entirely cut off from the world. They could receive visitors in certain parts of the Atrium Vestae, and they participated in many public festivals and ceremonies. They were very visible figures in Roman religious life, embodying a kind of serene, untouchable sanctity. The public perception of the Vestals was one of deep reverence mixed with a certain awe. They were seen as guardians of Rome's spiritual well-being, and their purity was considered essential for the efficacy of their rites. Any lapse on their part, especially the extinguishment of the flame or the breaking of their vow of chastity, which we'll delve into later, was seen as a threat to the entire state. Historians still debate the full extent of the Vestals' political influence, if any. While their religious role was paramount, their high status, their access to powerful figures, as they could be from elite families themselves, and the respect they commanded might have given them a subtle form of indirect influence. Could they have interceded in certain matters or offered counsel based on their unique spiritual standing? It's difficult to say definitively, as their primary role was so firmly rooted in the religious sphere. However, you can feel the immense pressure of their position, a life of privilege and honor, yes, but also one lived under constant scrutiny, where a single mistake could have devastating personal and symbolic consequences for Rome itself. The gentle flicker of that eternal flame was a constant reminder of their unending sacred watch, while tending the eternal flame was undeniably their most critical and continuous duty. The life of a Vestal virgin was filled with other important rituals and preparations essential to Roman religious life. Their sacred obligations extended beyond the walls of the Temple of Vesta, intertwining them with various state ceremonies and the spiritual well-being of the populace. You can imagine their days structured not just by the watches for the flame, but by a calendar of specific, recurring tasks, each performed with meticulous care and adherence to ancient tradition. One of their key responsibilities was the preparation of mola salsa, which translates to salted flour or sacred grain. This wasn't just any ordinary flour. It was a special mixture made from emmer wheat, an ancient grain that was coarsely ground, mixed with salt, and baked into hard cakes. You might see a pair of Vestals, perhaps a senior priestess guiding a novice, engaged in this process within the Atrium Vestae, the rhythmic sound of grinding stone on stone a familiar backdrop. The preparation of mola salsa was itself a ritual, likely accompanied by specific prayers or incantations. A mainstream historical fact is that this sacred substance was indispensable for many official Roman sacrifices. It was sprinkled on the heads of animal victims before they were sacrificed, and also used in offerings to various deities, symbolizing purity and consecration. The Vestals, with their own renowned purity, were the only ones deemed fit to prepare this vital component of state ritual. It's like they were in charge of the holiest of ingredients. Woe betide anyone who tried to substitute regular table salt. Excuse me, is this ritually pure salt, or did you get it from the plebeian market down the street? The gods can tell, you know. Another important task was the daily collection of water from a sacred spring, typically the spring of Juturna, also located in the Roman Forum, not far from their precinct. This water couldn't be transported in ordinary vessels or via conduits that might have touched impure things. Instead, the Vestals would carry it in special earthenware jars called futilia, which had a narrow base, making them difficult to set down, ensuring the water was used promptly and didn't become stagnant or ritually impure. You can picture a Vestal, robed and veiled, making her way with quiet grace to the spring each day, a scene of serene devotion amidst the forum's hustle and bustle. This sacred water was used for ritual purification of the Temple of Vesta and in various ceremonies. One quirky detail is the symbolic importance of using living water, water taken directly from a flowing spring or river, for sacred purposes, a concept found in many ancient religions, emphasizing its life-giving and purifying properties. The Vestals also played a role in guarding certain sacred objects stored within the Temple of Vesta, objects considered vital to Rome's safety and destiny. While the exact nature of all these items is shrouded in some mystery, one of the most famous was believed to be the Palladium, a legendary statue of Pallas Athena said to have been rescued from Troy by Aeneas. Its presence in Rome was thought to guarantee the city's invincibility. The inner sanctum of the temple, the Pinus Vestae, where these objects were kept, was so sacred that only the Vestals and the Pontifex Maximus were allowed to enter. Historians still debate the full inventory of these sacred relics and the precise rituals associated with their veneration. Were there regular inspections, specific offerings made to them, or were they simply kept hidden and protected, their power residing in their concealed presence? The secrecy surrounding these objects only added to the Vestal's mystique and the perceived importance of their guardianship. You can imagine the profound sense of trust placed in these women, keepers not only of the eternal flame, but also of Rome's most sacred and secret talismans. Their lives were a tapestry woven from fire, water, sacred flower, and unspoken secrets, all dedicated to the preservation and prosperity of Rome. The life of a Vestal virgin, as you've started to see, was one of profound responsibility and meticulous routine, centered around the sacred flame and ancient rituals. But this immense burden of duty came with a remarkable array of privileges and honors, setting them apart from, and in many ways above, other Roman women, and indeed, most Roman men. You can imagine that as a Vestal walked through the crowded streets of Rome, perhaps in a litter carried by attendants, a path would clear before her. The reverence they commanded was tangible, a reflection of their sacred status and their direct link to the divine well-being of the state. One of the most significant privileges granted to the Vestals was their legal autonomy. A mainstream historical fact is that upon taking their vows, a Vestal was emancipated from her father's patria potestas, paternal power, which was the lifelong authority a Roman father held over his children. Unlike other Roman women, who usually remained under the legal control of a father, husband, or guardian, the Vestals could own property, make wills, and give evidence in court without the need for a male guardian. This was an extraordinary level of independence for women in ancient Rome. You can picture a Vestal with her characteristic quiet dignity, managing her own affairs, a respected and legally empowered figure in a deeply patriarchal society. It's quite the career move for a 10-year-old girl. One minute you're under your dad's thumb, the next you're basically a legally independent religious VIP. Sorry, Dad, can't make it to the family picnic. I've got sacred duties and, legal personhood now. Their high status was also visibly demonstrated in public life. At gladiatorial games, chariot races, and other public spectacles in the Colosseum or Circus Maximus, the Vestals had special seats of honor, often located in prominent positions near the emperor or key magistrates. Imagine the scene: the roar of the crowd, the dust of the arena, and there, serene and respected, sit the priestesses of Vesta, a visible symbol of Rome's piety amidst the thrilling, often brutal, entertainment. Their presence was considered auspicious, a blessing on the proceedings. Another remarkable right they possessed was the ability to pardon a condemned criminal. If a person sentenced to death happened to encounter a Vestal virgin on his way to execution, his life was automatically spared. This wasn't something that happened frequently, as the encounter had to be accidental, but the very existence of this power underscores the immense sacrosanctity attributed to the Vestals. One quirky detail is that the Vestal supposedly had to swear that the meeting was indeed by chance. You can imagine the internal debate if a Vestal really wanted to save someone. Oh, what a complete and utter coincidence, running into you here, Gaius, on your way to be executed. Pure chance, I swear, on Vesta's hearth. The Vestals also had the right of way, and it was a serious offense for anyone to obstruct their passage. They could even be preceded by a lictor, a type of civil servant who acted as a bodyguard and cleared the way for magistrates, though this was usually when they were performing official duties outside their precinct. The Pontifex Maximus, their only direct male superior, was responsible for their discipline, but also for their protection and upkeep. Historians still debate the precise nature of the day-to-day relationship between the Pontifex Maximus and the College of Vestals. Was he a distant, overseeing authority, intervening only in matters of grave importance or during major rituals? Or was there more regular interaction and guidance? Given his role as the head of Roman state religion, his connection to the Vestals was crucial, but the internal dynamics of the Atrium Vestae likely remained largely under the purview of the Virgo Vestalis Maxima, the chief Vestal. You can feel the unique bubble of existence these women inhabited, revered, privileged, legally distinct, yet bound by vows and traditions that set them apart from the ordinary flow of Roman life. Their world was one of quiet power, sacred duty, and a level of public honor almost unparalleled for women of their time. For all the honors and privileges showered upon the Vestal virgins, there was one vow that overshadowed all others, one whose breach was considered an act of profound pollution and treason against the state, the vow of chastity. For 30 years, from the moment they were chosen as young girls until their term of service ended in their late 30s or early 40s, a Vestal was sworn to virginity. Her purity was believed to be inextricably linked to the purity of the sacred flame, and by extension, to the safety and prosperity of Rome itself. You can feel the immense symbolic weight placed upon their physical integrity. It wasn't just a personal moral failing if a Vestal broke this vow. It was an incestum, a sacrilege that defiled the goddess and endangered the entire Roman people. The punishment for a Vestal found guilty of unchastity was one of the most horrific and ritually complex in Roman law. Because her blood was considered sacred and could not be spilled, she could not be executed in a conventional manner. Instead, she was condemned to be buried alive. You try to imagine the sheer terror of such a fate. The condemned Vestal, dressed in funereal attire, would be carried in a closed litter, as if in a funeral procession, to a place called the Campus Sceleratus, the Field of Wickedness, located just inside the city walls, near the Call-In Gate. Here, a small subterranean chamber had been prepared. A mainstream historical fact is that she was given a meager amount of food and water, a loaf of bread, a pitcher of water, a little milk and oil, and a lighted lamp, provisions that technically meant she wasn't being directly killed by starvation, but rather left to her fate in this man-made tomb. The Pontifex Maximus would utter a secret prayer. Then the Vestal would be led down a ladder into the chamber, the ladder withdrawn, and the entrance sealed, entombing her alive. Her male partner in the transgression, if he could be identified, faced a different but equally grim fate. He would be publicly scourged to death in the Forum Boarium or Comitium by the Pontifex Maximus. The psychological pressure of this vow and its dreadful consequence must have been almost unbearable. These were women living in a vibrant, often licentious city, surrounded by the normal course of human relationships. While they lived within the relatively secluded Atrium Vestae, they were not entirely cut off from society. To maintain their vow perfectly for 3 decades, under such intense scrutiny, and with such a terrifying penalty for failure, required extraordinary discipline and fortitude. One quirky and rather sad detail is that sometimes Vestals were accused of incestum not because of concrete evidence of a sexual transgression, but due to things like dressing too fashionably, being too witty, or engaging in behavior deemed too lively for a priestess of Vesta, as was the case with the Vestal Postumia in the 5th century BCE. This suggests that public perception and the maintenance of an image of perfect piety were almost as important as the reality. A mere rumor or a departure from expected decorum could be enough to spark a dangerous investigation. It makes you wonder how many lived in constant, quiet fear of a false accusation or a momentary lapse in their carefully constructed public persona. Did I laugh too loudly at that joke during the festival? Oh gods, I hope no one from the Pontifical College was listening. Accusations of unchastity against a Vestal were taken with utmost seriousness and investigated by the College of Pontiffs, presided over by the Pontifex Maximus. The trial would be a solemn affair. If found guilty by the pontiffs, the sentence was passed. Historians still debate how frequently such accusations occurred and how many Vestals actually suffered this terrible punishment over the 1,000-year history of the order. While ancient sources record several instances, it seems to have been a relatively rare event, which speaks to either the Vestal's general adherence to their vows or perhaps the difficulty of proving such a charge. Some famous cases, like the trial of Aemilia, Licinia, and Marcia in 114 to 113 BCE, involved political intrigue and public outrage, suggesting that these trials could sometimes become more than just religious matters, getting entangled in broader social and political tensions. You can feel the oppressive weight of expectation on these women, chosen for their purity, but forever living under the shadow of a truly terrifying penalty, their every action potentially scrutinized for any hint of impropriety. Their sacred status was a double-edged sword, granting immense privilege but demanding an almost inhuman perfection. Beyond the high-stakes drama of their vows and the public reverence they received, the daily life of the 6 Vestal virgins unfolded within the surprisingly spacious and well-appointed confines of the Atrium Vestae, their official residence. You step through an imagined archway into a large, rectangular courtyard, perhaps with a central fountain softly burbling, surrounded by multi-storied porticos. This wasn't a cramped, ascetic nunnery. It was more like a grand, self-contained sacred college. Statues of former chief Vestals, the Virgines Vestali Maximi, might line the colonnades, a silent testament to the long lineage of their order. The air here is calmer than in the bustling forum outside, a sanctuary of routine and focused devotion. You can almost hear the soft rustle of their woolen robes as they move through the corridors, the distant hum of their tasks. Each Vestal had her own private apartment, likely consisting of a bedroom and a sitting room, comfortably, if not ostentatiously, furnished. These rooms would have been her personal sanctuary, a place for rest and perhaps quiet contemplation after her hours of duty tending the flame or participating in rituals. A mainstream historical fact is that archaeological excavations of the Atrium Vestais have revealed these individual living quarters, along with communal spaces like kitchens, bakeries, and mills, indicating that the household was largely self-sufficient in its daily needs. They also had bathrooms with running water, a significant luxury in ancient Rome. It's clear that while their lives were restricted in terms of personal freedom, their physical comfort and living standards were quite high, befitting their status. It's like a very exclusive, very long-term boarding school, but with much more serious final exams. The internal hierarchy was clear. The Virgo Vestalis Maxima, or Chief Vestal, presided over the college. She was usually the eldest and most experienced of the 6, having served the longest. She had considerable authority within the atrium, overseeing the duties of the other Vestals, managing the household, and likely acting as the primary liaison with the Pontifex Maximus. You can imagine her as a figure of immense dignity and wisdom, guiding the novices through their 10 years of training, ensuring the rituals were performed flawlessly, and upholding the discipline of the order. Her role was crucial for the smooth functioning and continuity of this sacred institution. One quirky detail is that the Vestals, through their temple and college, likely controlled considerable property and financial endowments. Managing these assets, which would have contributed to their upkeep and the temple's expenses, might have been another less discussed responsibility of the chief Vestal and perhaps her senior colleagues. So they weren't just spiritual guardians, they might have also been astute property managers. Sister Claudia, have you collected the rents from the Vesta-owned olive grove this month? The sacred flame doesn't fuel itself, you know.
The first decade of a Vestal service, as you know, was dedicated to learning. Picture a young girl, freshly taken from her family, entering this imposing new world. She would be under the tutelage of the older Vestals, gradually initiated into the complex rituals, the hymns and prayers, all likely in archaic Latin, adding another layer of difficulty, the precise methods for tending the flame, preparing the mola salsa, and collecting the sacred water. She would learn the history of the order, the significance of the sacred objects in their care, and the intricate rules governing their conduct. Historians still debate the full scope of this education. Did it include broader literacy, an understanding of Roman law relevant to their status, or even elements of philosophy? Given their legal autonomy and the need to manage affairs, a certain level of practical knowledge beyond purely religious ritual seems likely. The interactions between the Vestals, the 6 of them living and working so closely together for decades, must have formed a unique, intense bond. They were sisters in service, sharing a unique destiny, their lives interwoven by their shared vows and sacred duties. There were likely friendships, mentorships, and perhaps occasional quiet frictions, as in any small, closed community. But overriding all would have been their shared commitment to Vesta and the well-being of Rome, a bond forged in the constant presence of that eternal, watchful flame. The lives of the Vestal virgins, while centered on the Atrium Vestae and the ever-burning flame, were not entirely cloistered. Their sacred duties extended into the public sphere, making them visible and vital participants in many of Rome's most important religious festivals and state ceremonies. You can imagine them emerging from their hallowed precinct, their distinctive white robes a symbol of purity and divine favor, to take their honored place in processions that wound through the Forum, or to perform specific rites at other sacred locations throughout the city. Their presence was often considered essential for the proper conduct and efficacy of these public rituals, a tangible link between the state, its gods, and its people. A mainstream historical fact is that the Vestals played a prominent role in the Vestalia, the festival honoring their patron goddess, Vesta, held annually from June 7th to June 15th. During this period, the inner sanctum of the Temple of Vesta, normally off-limits to most, was open to Roman matrons who wished to make offerings to the goddess. The Vestals would have overseen these activities, preparing special cakes and ensuring the sanctity of the temple. You might see them leading processions of barefoot women to the temple, the air filled with the scent of offerings and the sound of hymns. They also participated in other significant festivals. For instance, during the Lupercalia, an ancient and rather wild fertility festival in February, they would offer mola salsa and sacred cakes made from the first ears of the harvest. At the Forticidia in April, a festival involving the sacrifice of pregnant cows to promote fertility of the earth, the ashes of the unborn calves were kept by the Vestals and later used in the Perilia, a festival for the purification of shepherds and sheep. Their involvement in these deeply rooted agricultural and fertility rites highlights their connection to the fundamental well-being and continuity of Roman life. Beyond these calendrical festivals, the Vestals were sometimes called upon for special state prayers or rituals during times of crisis, such as drought, plague, or military threat. Their perceived purity and close connection to Vesta made their intercessions particularly potent in the eyes of the Roman people. You can imagine the solemnity of such occasions, the Vestals leading prayers for the city's deliverance, their every gesture scrutinized for signs of divine favor or displeasure. One quirky detail is their role as custodians of important documents. Because the Temple of Vesta was considered inviolable, it became a trusted repository for wills, treaties, and other state papers. Famous Romans, including emperors like Augustus and Tiberius, entrusted their last testaments to the care of the Vestal virgins. This safeguarding of crucial legal and political documents speaks volumes about the immense trust and respect they commanded, extending beyond the purely religious sphere. It's like they were the ultimate secure deposit box, guaranteed by divine protection. need to store your highly sensitive political dynamite of a will. Forget a safety deposit box, give it to the Vestals. Nobody messes with the Vestals. Their participation in these public roles, combined with their unique legal status and privileges, made them figures of considerable public interest and influence, even if it was indirect. Historians still debate the extent to which individual Vestals, particularly the Virgo Vestalis Maxima, might have discreetly wielded influence through their connections with Rome's elite families, from which they were drawn, or through the respect afforded to them by magistrates and even emperors. While their primary loyalty was to Vesta and the state religion, it's conceivable that their opinions or intercessions on certain matters might have carried weight. You see them not just as reclusive priestesses tending a fire, but as integral components of Rome's religious and civic machinery, their quiet routines punctuated by moments of significant public duty, their lives a constant performance of sanctity and tradition for the benefit of the entire Roman world. Their every public appearance reinforced the religious underpinnings of the state and their own unique, powerful place within it. The 30-year term of a Vestal Virgin's sacred service, a vast span of dedication initiated in childhood, eventually draws to its close. You imagine a woman now in her late 30s or early 40s, her life defined by the rhythms of the Atrium Vestae, the unwavering glow of the sacred flame, and the intricate tapestry of Roman ritual. She has fulfilled her vows, served her goddess and her city with unwavering devotion, and now stands at a unique threshold. Unlike many other priesthoods in Rome, which might be held for shorter periods or alongside other civic duties, hers has been a total, immersive commitment. And with its conclusion comes a remarkable new chapter: freedom. Upon completing her 30 years, a Vestal Virgin was free to leave the priesthood, return to private life, and, significantly, she was now permitted to marry. This was a momentous transition. A mainstream historical fact is that while marriage was an option, and some former Vestals did indeed marry, often into prominent families, it was not a universally chosen path. After 3 decades of unparalleled status, religious authority, and a life lived largely independent of male control, returning to the conventional role of a Roman matron, subject to a husband's authority, might have held limited appeal for some. You can picture her, a woman of mature years, weighing her options. The prospect of family life, perhaps children, after a lifetime of celibacy, might have been alluring. Yet the thought of relinquishing the unique freedoms and respect she had enjoyed could have given her pause. Whether they chose to marry or not, former Vestals continued to be figures of immense respect and honor within Roman society. They retained many of their privileges and were often sought after as prestigious brides, bringing with them not only their impeccable reputation, but also likely a considerable dowry accumulated from their service or family connections. You can imagine the social cachet for a Roman nobleman to marry a former Vestal. It was a testament to his own standing and piety. It's like marrying a beloved retired celebrity who also happens to be a revered spiritual icon. Oh, you married a senator's daughter. Cute. I married Fabia. She kept Rome from spiritually imploding for 3 decades. Top that. One quirky detail is that ancient sources suggest that marriages of former Vestals were not always perceived as being particularly auspicious or happy. Perhaps after so many years of such a unique and structured life, adjusting to the demands and compromises of marriage in a patriarchal society was challenging. Or maybe it was simply a societal superstition, an unease about a woman who had once been so sacredly set apart, re-entering the more mundane sphere of matrimony. It's a subtle undercurrent to what was otherwise a position of continued esteem.
Historians still debate how smoothly this transition back into society truly was for most former Vestals, and what their lives were truly like after leaving the Atrium Vestae. Did they maintain close ties with the active Vestals? Did they continue to play any informal advisory or ceremonial role? Or did they largely disappear into the private sphere, their public life concluded? The surviving evidence is somewhat limited, often focusing on the more sensational aspects of the Vestals' lives, like accusations of unchastity, rather than the quieter realities of their post-service existence. You get the sense that these were women who, having fulfilled an extraordinary public duty, navigated their later years with the same dignity and gravitas that had characterized their time tending Vesta's flame. They carried with them a lifetime of experiences, unlike any other Roman woman, a unique blend of sacred authority, public honor, and personal discipline. Their presence in society, even in retirement, would have been a living link to the ancient traditions and the spiritual heart of Rome. For over 1,000 years, the sacred flame of Vesta had burned, a seemingly eternal beacon at the heart of Rome, tended by an unbroken line of Vestal virgins. Their white robes and serene presence were as much a fixture of the Roman landscape as the Colosseum or the Pantheon. But as the Roman Empire itself underwent profound transformations, particularly with the rise of Christianity, the ancient pagan cults, including the venerable order of the Vestals, faced an existential threat. You can sense a gradual shift in the spiritual atmosphere of Rome, a waning of the old god's influence as a new faith takes root and eventually gains imperial favor. The once unshakable foundations of Roman state religion begin to crumble. The decline was not sudden, but a slow erosion of status, funding, and relevance over several decades in the 4th century CE. As Christianity became increasingly dominant, emperors began to withdraw state support from pagan priesthoods and temples. You can imagine the growing unease within the Atrium Vestae, as their traditional privileges were curtailed and their sacred role in the life of the city was questioned by a new religious orthodoxy. The number of patrician families willing to dedicate their daughters to a priesthood whose future looked increasingly uncertain may have dwindled. A mainstream historical fact is that in 382 CE, the Christian Emperor Gratian confiscated the revenues and properties of the Vestals and other pagan temples in Rome. This was a devastating blow, stripping them of their financial independence and state support, making it incredibly difficult to maintain their grand household and perform their elaborate rituals. It was a clear signal that the imperial tide had turned decisively against the old ways. Despite these pressures, it seems the Vestals, or at least a dedicated remnant, clung to their sacred duties for as long as they could. You can picture them, perhaps fewer in number now, still diligently tending the flame in a city increasingly indifferent or even hostile to their ancient rites. The once bustling Atrium Vestae might have felt emptier, quieter, its grand halls echoing with a sense of impending loss. One quirky and poignant detail from this period is the story of a prominent pagan senator named Quintus Aurelius Symmachus, who passionately but unsuccessfully pleaded with Emperor Valentinian II, Gratian's successor, around 384 CE for the restoration of the altar of victory in the Senate House and for the renewed funding of the Vestals. His eloquent appeal, arguing for the importance of Rome's ancestral traditions and the divine protection they afforded, fell on deaf ears. It was a last stand for state-sponsored paganism, but the momentum of Christianization was too strong. The final act came under Emperor Theodosius I, who issued a series of decrees in the early 3900s CE that effectively outlawed pagan worship, closed temples, and prohibited sacrifices. A pivotal moment, marking the symbolic end of an era, was the official extinguishment of the sacred flame of Vesta, likely around 391 or 394 CE. Imagine that scene. The last chief Vestal, perhaps a woman named Coelia Concordia, who is historically recorded as one of the last known Virgines Maximae, overseeing the dying embers of a fire that had burned for over a millennium. The emotional weight of that moment, the extinguishing of Rome's spiritual hearth, is hard to overstate. It was more than just a fire going out. It was the end of a world, the final closure of a religious tradition that had defined Rome since its inception. Historians still debate the exact circumstances of this final extinguishment. Was it a quiet fading away as the last Vestals simply abandoned their post due to lack of support? Or was there a more formal, even forceful act of closure by imperial authorities? Regardless of the specifics, the silence that fell over the Temple of Vesta after that flame died must have been profound. With the flame gone and their order officially suppressed, the Atrium Vestae, once a center of sacred life, fell into disuse and eventually ruin, like so many other pagan sanctuaries. The remaining Vestals, if any were still in service, would have had to find new lives in a rapidly changing Roman world, their sacred occupation gone, their unique status a thing of the past. You feel a sense of melancholy for this ancient institution, a quiet routine of devotion and service that had endured for so long, now relegated to the annals of a superseded faith. The heart of Rome, in a spiritual sense, had stopped beating in the way it had for centuries. Though the sacred flame was extinguished and the Order of Vestal Virgins disbanded nearly 16 centuries ago, their legacy endures, a fascinating and complex chapter in the long story of ancient Rome. They are remembered not just as priestesses of a forgotten goddess, but as unique figures who occupied a remarkable space within a patriarchal society, embodying ideals of purity, duty, and civic devotion. You can almost see their white-robed figures as ghosts in the ruins of the Roman Forum, their story whispering through the ancient stones, prompting us to consider the intricate interplay of religion, gender, and power in the Roman world. The archaeological remains of the Atrium Vestae, the House of the Vestals, excavated in the Roman Forum, offer a tangible connection to their lives. Walking among the foundations of their courtyard, the remnants of their private rooms, and the statues erected in honor of chief Vestals, you get a palpable sense of their daily existence and the grandeur of their official residence. A mainstream historical fact is that these excavations have provided invaluable insights into their living conditions, their internal organization, and the sheer scale of their precinct, confirming their privileged status. The discovery of portrait statues of Virgines Maximae, often with inscriptions detailing their long service and virtues, allows us to put faces, however idealized, to some of these remarkable women. It's like sifting through the ashes of a long-gone era and finding not just objects, but hints of the individual lives that animated these sacred spaces. The Vestal Virgins continue to be a subject of fascination for historians and the public alike because they represent such a striking anomaly. In a society where women's lives were largely defined by marriage and domesticity, the Vestals held significant public office, possessed legal autonomy, and commanded immense respect. One quirky detail that highlights their unique status is that their hair, ritually cut when they entered service, was considered sacred. Even small strands were likely treated with reverence, And the Senicrine's hairstyle itself was a potent symbol. It makes you think about the power of symbols and how they were used to construct and maintain their unique position. Were they proto-feminist icons, carving out a space for female authority? Or were they, in a sense, honorary men, their purity and sacred function allowing them to transcend typical gender roles, but only by renouncing ordinary female lives? Historians still debate this very question. How should we interpret the role and significance of the Vestal Virgins? Were they truly empowered women, or were they ultimately tools of a patriarchal state religion, their lives strictly controlled and their bodies policed to serve male-defined notions of civic purity and order? The reality is likely complex, a mixture of both. They certainly wielded more autonomy and public influence than most Roman women, yet their existence was predicated on a vow of virginity that, if broken, led to a horrific death. Their story reveals the complicated ways in which societies can create exceptional roles for women, roles that grant power and privilege, but often come with severe restrictions and high personal costs. Ultimately, the Vestal Virgins stand as a testament to Rome's deep reverence for tradition, its complex religious tapestry, and its understanding of the symbolic power needed to maintain a vast empire. For over 1,000 years, they were the guardians of Rome's spiritual heart, their quiet routines and unwavering devotion believed to be essential for the city's survival and prosperity. Their legacy is not just in the ruins of their temple, but in the enduring questions they raise about the nature of sacred duty, the roles of women in public life, and the delicate balance between individual lives and the perceived needs of the state. You leave them in the quiet of their long-vanished atrium, the echo of their chants, and the warmth of their eternal flame lingering in the historical imagination. Now, as our exploration of the Vestal Virgins and their sacred flame comes to a close, allow the images of ancient Rome, the solemn temple, and the white-robed priestesses to gently recede. Their world of intricate ritual and unwavering devotion can now become a peaceful backdrop as you prepare for your own journey into sleep. Let the thought of the ever-burning flame transform into a symbol of calm, steady breathing, a quiet, internal light that soothes and comforts. The bustling sounds of the Roman Forum fade away, replaced by the stillness of your own quiet space. The weight of their immense responsibilities, the 30 years of service can now lift, leaving behind only a sense of deep respect for their dedication. Imagine the serene atmosphere of the Atrium Vestae, its cool courtyards and quiet halls offering a sense of peace and order to your mind. Any lingering thoughts about their strict vows or the mysteries of their sacred duties can now dissolve like incense smoke drifting into the night air. There are no more rituals to perform, no more ancient texts to decipher. There is only the gentle pull of slumber, the promise of rest. The lives of these remarkable women, once so vital to the Roman world, now become a soft, historical lullaby, their story complete. Allow yourself to drift into that peaceful, timeless space where history sleeps, and where you too can find deep and restorative repose. Good night,